Alright YouTube, it's time for Occult video 95 on Dowsing, something that I will say right up front I do not believe in. I'll give an example from Moronism, Mormonism, sorry about that, as a way to illustrate what's actually going on here. Dowsing takes two essential forms. The first is the traditional, like you probably heard of it as a kid. You take like a Y-shaped piece of wood, usually willow or hazel, although others I've heard mentioned, and you hold it by two ends, and it sort of makes a Y. And you just point it outwards, and you walk around, and if it like suddenly dips downwards, it means you've come to where water is. Now, because of the prevalence of groundwater being as it is, which is to say, in most parts of the world, fairly common, there's a pretty damn good chance that any random dip in that piece of wood, including from your hands getting tired, and your brain just fools you into thinking that it was the wood that did it, there's a pretty good chance if you dig, 10 feet down or something, it's going to start pooling up with a little bit of water or something like that. Unless you're like on the literal top of a mountain or in the middle of a desert. So I don't really believe that that has any veracity. I can't understand why people would think that a piece of wood would react to being over, a natural well or something like that. It just doesn't make sense. The other tendency, and this one involves metal rods, is you would take two sort of copper or similar rods, I've seen steel used too, and they're about a foot long. You hold one end and it sort of curves and then goes straight. And you hold them down and you just sort of move around slowly with them, and at some point they cross, they connect to one another, and that's supposed to be a magnetic hotspot drawing the two ends in, and then you sort of plant them there and it seals up this magnetic spot, and it's used to prevent like cancer and stuff like that. I've tried this out before, and what I noticed is that these little rods have a tendency, if you're holding them properly at all, to randomly click together anyway. That's because the most minute of your hand motions is causing that to happen, or you swing to the side and it suddenly closes or something like that. It's not a magnetic hotspot. The idea that electromagnetism plays that big a role in disease would be pretty damn unfortunate, because the electromagnetic field around Earth, which is far more powerful than some little hotspot that you've concocted in your mind, is ever in flux. It grows stronger, it grows weaker over time, it switches polarity all around. And so you're not really sealing anything up. You'd have to like do it every few hours in order to actually take, if it were such an effect happening and you were worried about it causing cancer or something, just like people worry about microwave food causes cancer, and the cell phone and Wi-Fi causes cancer, power lines, everything apparently causes cancer in some form. I guess, we've got to go live in caves, because cavemen never got cancer apparently. Unless they ate their food too well done when, before they had fire, everything was okay. They lived to be like 30, but at least they didn't have cancer, I guess. If it were actually the case that you were able to seal these little, like, hot spots you're imagining exist, you'd have to constantly move them because the electromagnetic field of the Earth is constantly moving. Wouldn't make any sense. But giving an example, look at Mormonism. Look what Joseph Smith used to do. He used to do something very similar. He would take his magic rocks, and he would pretend he could find treasure with them, in a manner similar to dowsing, honestly. What he was actually doing is he'd plant like a little box with some money or a piece of jewelry in it or something on somebody's property, wait a few days, and he'd go around to the town and say, "Oh, I can find buried treasure with my magic rocks because God has inspired me." And people would be like, "Oh yeah, show us." And then he'd pretend to search around, then he'd go find this like box of treasure on someone's property, say, "Oh yeah, the farmer can have this," or whatever. And then pretty soon people would be offering him money in order to, find treasure, or he'd have an accomplice really help him some of the time. And then he'd skip town before the next day, when he had promised to search all the people's property who had given him money, because he knew he couldn't actually find buried treasure. He'd skip town with the extra money. So he'd waste a couple dollars buying a piece of silver or something to plant somewhere, and he'd make, a significant sum more back, even if people weren't feeling particularly generous that day about his services. And so that's really what it is. Really what dowsing boils down to, especially in the New Age sense of close up the electromagnetic hotspots, which had nothing to do with the practice of finding water in the more traditional sense of dowsing anyway. Really what it boils down to is, hey, buy my pieces of metal for an inflated price. You know, you could literally take a wire hanger and bend it into this shape for 1/10 the cost, but no, buy mine because mine are, I don't know, charged with orgone or something like that. And it really is. It's similar to like orgone and all of these other sort of things that people have now, none of which have any validity in science or in the occult. Not a little bit. None. Orgone is not in occult literature. The concept of the force of orgone as being a resin-coated pile of metal shavings that has miraculous powers and destroys clouds or chemtrails or whatever. It just doesn't happen. It's not within the tradition of occultism, and it's not accepted by science. If it's not in either, if it's not at least alluded to in some form of occult literature from the past, especially from the recent pre-modern era, I'd say, from, you know, the Enlightenment through the late Victorian or Edwardian era, especially when people had more of an eye towards the secular when they were discussing spiritual topics. If there's nothing about it in there, my interest in a subject tends to wane. So this would be a cautionary video largely. No, dowsing does not do anything. It has absolutely no purpose. You're not sealing up magnetic hotspots. You're not going to cure your cancer or whatever. You're not going to find water with a piece of wood. If you want to find water, drill for water. It's just as easy, and it's far more effective. There's probably water somewhere around you. You just have to find it. Use your common sense. Study maybe a little bit of elementary geology or something like that. If you're interested in preventing cancer, then probably you should take some medical advice. Eat more greens. Clean out your colon with plenty of fiber. Get your vitamins and minerals and some exercise. You probably shouldn't smoke or binge drink or any of these things, or smoke crack, certainly. And yeah, you probably shouldn't constantly fry everything that you eat. Probably this advice would save a lot more cancer patients' lives, as opposed to, yeah, take these little metal rods and stick them in odd arrangements around your house anytime your hands get tired. That's about all. Peace out.